welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. What's going on, Dr. Dave?
Dr. Joe, I'm doing fantastic today.
That's great.
It's
That's
been a while
great.
since I said that.
Yeah, just about 7 days. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, we just want to welcome our audience back. Again, thank you for tuning in to this episode. And if you're new to this um, podcast, then thanks for joining in. But hopefully, we can provide you with some type of information that you can take back and use for your own journey. All right, with that, for those of you who have been on the podcast before, listened to the podcast before, you know we typically will take one person and introduce that topic, and the other one will get us going. So I have that responsibility today. And so the topic we're going to talk about is what's on your plate. And I'm not talking about, we're still finishing up the summer, but so I'm not talking about ribs and things like that, but more kind of
Meatloaf and
what's
mashed potatoes.
yeah, that sounds good. But we're talking more in terms of what type of projects are you working on? What is got you bogged down as far as all these responsibilities? So Dave is going to kick us off. So what is on your plate, Dave?
A lot. There's always a lot on my plate. And, that can be a good answer. A lot of leaders and managers and supervisors, oh, I want your plate to be full. That can be good. But it can also be not so good because if you have too much on your plate, something's not getting done.
Right.
So when we talk
Absolutely.
about what's on your plate, we need to find out and understand, priorities is a big one. You know, companies love to put, if you like to work, companies love to just pile that work on. You hear that beep, 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 and they're backing up the truck and they're just unloading all this stuff onto your
Right.
desk. And, when you talk to a lot of managers and supervisors and leaders, they're like, everything's a priority. But if you have 5 things that are a priority that are taking up 10 hours out of your day and they throw out another 5 things, that's another 10 hours. That's 4 hours you have left in your day to eat, sleep, get to work, spend time with your family, do your schooling or whatever else you need. It's not realistic. So
Right.
we need to understand what's really on our plate, and that if everything's a priority, or if we have a lot of priorities, what is the priority among them? Because if another priority is added, something's got to give. There's only so many hours
Absolutely.
in the
Yeah.
day. And if you stack on one or make one heavier, then something's got to get lighter. There's only 100%. What does that 100% look like? There's not 110, 150. It's 100%. That's the full pie. 360 degrees. There's not 500 degrees in a circle.
Right.
360. So what does that division look like? What does that order look like? What does that prioritization look like? And that's what we're going to focus on a personal development and professional development side. Do you have a balance on your plate? Do you have too much meat, not enough potatoes? Do you have too many veggies, not enough proteins? Are you vegetarian, vegan? Are you just a meat lovers pizza kind of person? What do you have on your plate? What do you have too much of? What do you have not enough of? Or do you have it just right? That kind of Goldilocks theory. So that's what we're going to be running with.
Okay.
So I'm going to toss that hot potato back over to you.
All right. Well, we're still talking barbecue references
Yeah.
and things like that. But Dave, you bring up something that
Yeah.
occurs all the time or often, and the way you put it was that managers think that if your plate's full, everything's a priority, then all these things get done. And you're right. The more priorities or prioritized projects that we think we have, the less time we have to do that. So I agree with you 100% that that's, the theory behind a lot of leaders is that if I put all this stuff on this individual, then they're doing their job.
Mhm.
But to your point, if everything is a priority, everything is hot, needs to be done, then you have to prioritize the
Yeah.
priorities.
What's the sequence that
Exactly.
your working
And
sequence?
and it's funny because I had this conversation with the manager in recent years. If everything, it doesn't matter if I'm working like you said 10 hours a day, and you continue to pile projects on me, and we just are only allowed to give so much to each project, they never get done. So
Mhm.
unless we prioritize them, figure out what's important today, tomorrow, do those first,
Mhm.
what's, further down the road, maybe a month or 2 months out, that we can tackle next. And then those things that we like to do, but they're not going to have an immediate impact or immediate need for us. So maybe those are pushed down the line. So unless we get to that point where we um, figure out what those things are, then we're going to be spinning our wheels trying to give a small percentage to all of these things.
Mhm.
And that also takes that reflection piece on what can I really handle. And
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
retired from the military October 2020, and even though I gave up, well, not gave up, but I retired out of that part of my life, or ready for a new season. That's actually one of the first things I did, was really take a look at how much stuff I had on my plate. And after that reflection, I was really shocked with all of the things I was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, you
I
had just
mean,
a few dozen things on
just a few
there.
things. I mean, so it just really shocked me to really take stock in everything I was trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
I think I was being successful, but I didn't realize it would cost,
Mhm.
and the time that I was, giving up. So it just really opened my eyes to, the time that we have in a day. You said it, I'm spending 12 hours a day doing these things, then I've got 6 or 7 I need to sleep. And then, so there's not much room for anything else. And so that's exactly what I did. I minimized the things I was doing. I wasn't took a break from teaching.
Mhm.
Some of the other things that I was doing, and I just, at that time, I didn't know actually what to do, because I had been consumed by contributing so much time and energy to all these different things, that I was really at a loss at what do I do now. But it was definitely needed for me to take that time and really evaluate what was on my plate, because I did not realize it until after I really sat down, took a look at it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I,
go ahead.
I, I was just going to just end it with, the reason I say all that is, we all need to really take that break, take a look at, again, what makes sense, what can be moved, and kind of like I said earlier, in this, when I started, take a look at what needs to be done today, what can be done a little bit later, and then what can be postponed or pushed off to a, much further distance. So that's why I wanted to end it, just kind of get you thinking along those lines.
Yeah, and along that, when we're talking about the number of hours and, percentage of time, I'm just gonna use 8 hours as an example. 8 hours becomes that 100%. And then you have to subtract, if you have hourly employees, breaks and lunch. If you have salaried employees, hopefully you're giving them breaks and lunch too.
Right.
And then whatever is left is the time for them to be productive. And employees have to pace themselves. Employees are not machines. So we talk about pacing ourselves. So if we have, let's say, an hour and a half is breaks and lunch, you get an hour for lunch and half, two 15-minute breaks or something like that, an hour and a half, you're down to 6.5 hours of that 8. So
Right.
what can you get done in 6.5 hours? And to your point, if you've got 5 projects, let's say 6 projects to get done in 6 hours, that's an hour per project on average. And if another 3 projects come along, or 4 projects, that time gets reduced. Conversely, just because you have two projects that you're working on and there's a lull because you're waiting on a response, doesn't mean you don't have anything to do. There are other things that you
Right.
can be
Yeah.
doing, and you should use that for either lower level priority tasks, or even tasks that are taking longer that you can fill in that time with. Or the other option is, maybe you're salaried and you work that 6 hours and you take a couple hours off because you've done your time. That's a
Right.
salaried employee, knowing that other days you might have to do 10 or 11 hours, but it's going to balance out in the end. That's also another thought to consider. A lot of companies, though, are focused on the bottom line, and rightfully so, because many of them are public and they have shareholders that they're responsible to. And that revenue that the shareholders make is based upon the overall productivity of the company. So they want more out of you. That's just the
Right.
way it is. So
Yeah.
you have to understand the environment that you're in. And when we talk about that, how does that impact your family life or your personal life, how does that impact that? And you and I both went to school full time, or we were working full time. We had
Right.
families, and some of us were gluttons for punishment, and we were teaching and trying to write books or doing podcasts, and we volunteer. And then there's maybe you go to church or have some other social gathering that you go to on a daily or weekly basis, and next thing you know, all the hours are gone. So what do we do? What do we do in a case like that? It comes to prioritizing. And
Right.
Joe and I, we speak about this quite a lot, that we think about what's on our plate right now, and sometimes we realize, oh, well, I'll just take on that one little thing, and then this one little thing, and then that one little thing,
Yep.
and then realize, all of a sudden you realize you have 8 things on your plate, and maybe you need to cut back because there are only so many hours a day. There's only so much gas in your gas tank before you're running on fumes, and you wind up on the side of the road trying to flag someone down to get some more juice in your tank. So these are all things we need to think about when we talk about, what's on our plate. It's great to say you have a lot of things to do and that you're really busy, but what's actually getting done is the other side of that.
Right. Yeah, Dave, you bring up a very good point. We all feel like we can do it all. We're supermen, superwomen, and you're right. We start to say, "Hey, yeah, I can do that. I can, add this. I can do that." And then you look back and take stock at what you committed to, and you realize, "Oh my goodness, I have overcommitted myself,"
Mhm.
and that becomes a potentially health issue.
Mhm.
Again, now you're stressing over. I've got all these deadlines. I've got all these projects that I'm working on. I've committed myself to this and to doing those things. And then, you talk about the say hour and a half day part of your day that's supposed to be yours for lunch and
Mhm.
breaks if you work for a company. That turns into you not taking those breaks, you not taking lunch,
Mhm.
taking those well earned and deserved times where you should take a pause.
Yeah.
And now that we've committed to or overcommitted to all these things, now we still feel like we have to fit those things in,
Yeah.
and that's
That's
when
a
it
great
becomes
example, Joe. I think an analogy or metaphor for that is your cell phone. There's only 100%, and then you have
right.
to, once it gets low, you have to charge it, because
Yep.
it's either gonna not perform the way optimally, or it's gonna start just it's gonna deplete, and then
Absolutely.
you're out of juice, and you're out
Yep.
of storage or power or motivation or energy. What do you got to do? Even cell phones have to take a break, folks. Even cell phones have to take a break. So if cell phones have to do it, then your people do also. And that's
Right.
an important thing to think about, because Joe and I found ourselves, I know when I first started teaching, I was excited to teach at college,
Yep.
and I got one class, and then I started teaching another one, and I'm like, oh, I can do 2 classes at a time. So I did 2, and I got 3, and then 4, and then 5, and I'm like, wait, I'm teaching 3 or 4 classes, and I'm working full time, and I have a
Right.
family, and
Yep.
wanting to do all these other projects around the house, and write a book or whatever, and the hours just evaporated.
Yep.
And some people feel guilty. I know I did, about, well, I have to turn down this class coming up. They're really depending on me, but I have to turn it down. No, I'm going to say yes. No, you need to say no, Dave, because there's no more hours in the day. Where are you going to get it
Right.
from?
But that is a real thing that I did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like you're obligated to continue to do those things. You
Mm-hmm.
commit to it and you keep committing to it, and then it ultimately gets to a point where you're like, I can't do it anymore, and
Yeah.
that's not the place you really want to be. Like you say, you start out with the excitement,
Yeah.
um, and you want to do it, and then it turns into that obligation to the point where you're like, I don't really want to do this, and so that's what happens to you when you overcommit, when you got too many things on your plate, is the fact that now that you're doing all these things, you're not really effective at any of them because
Yeah.
you got too many things going on. And that's why I go back to what I said, toward the beginning, is the fact that you really have to prioritize those things, and people that are providing you with all these tasks and projects, they need to understand that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said at the very beginning, just because we give you 10 projects, and we can say, you know at our to our next level, organization, that yeah, we're working on all these things, so when can you expect completion on those things if you're again parsing parsing out and piecing it together 10 projects,
Mhm.
when will one ever be completed?
Right.
So it just,
The
yeah,
more projects that you have on your plate, the longer it's going to take to
it's going
complete
to
all of them.
take. And I, it's, again, people struggle with that. They feel like, well, you're here 8, 9 hours a day, then we want to make sure you're busy. Again,
Mhm.
that's does not mean you're being effective just because
Yeah.
you've got all these projects, you're doing all these things.
Yeah.
The reality is, if you take the time to figure out what's most important, what's going to be the biggest bang for our buck, what's the biggest impact we can make today, let's do those things.
Yeah.
And then as you start to check off that list, you'll
Then
start
you
to
can add it.
see,
Yep.
yeah, you'll start to see daylight. You'll start to see these projects are getting completed. They're efficient. They're effective. And then you keep going down. Then you can add those lists. But as you add projects to that list, you prioritize them to see where they fit. And some may move in and move some others out because
Mhm.
that's the priority level you place on them. But that's important. And I don't think enough people do that. Again, we all just raise our hand and say, yeah, I can do that. I'll squeeze it in here. I'll squeeze it in there. But then what suffers when you accept that commitment?
Right. Yeah. Another metaphor, it's like running a race. You have to pace yourself, whether it's a
Right.
sprint or a marathon, you have to pace yourself. And if we think about work as being, let's say, a marathon, then we know it, let's say we know it's going to take 2 hours for us to run that marathon under optimal conditions.
Right.
But if they start adding weight onto you, 5 pounds, 5 pounds isn't that much. So I can do a little bit extra.
Right.
And then another mile down the road, they add another 5 pounds. And every mile they add on 5 pounds. After 10 miles, you've got 50 extra pounds. You're not going to finish in 2 hours
Yeah.
because all that weight is slowing you down. And if we think about, what's on our plate and prioritizing, that's essentially what happens. We've
That's a
got,
good
there's
analogy.
only so much
Absolutely.
weight a person can carry before they're
Right.
bogged down. And it's not that they're stagnant or procrastinating. It's just that there's so little effort being put towards one thing that's moving so slowly, and it seems like you're never going to meet your deadline. And it's not that you won't meet your deadline. It's just the question is whether you'll meet your deadline within the schedule.
Right.
It'll get
Right.
done. It's just when. And,
Right.
that's what, employers, I think, struggle with that too, because as much as they say that people are people, we recognize that you look at the workloads on some of their employees and it's like, how are they even getting this done? Because
Right.
sprinting a marathon is not sustainable. It's just not. You have to pace yourself, and maybe you trade off with a partner and they take over for part of the run. Whatever has to be done, there's got to be a way to figure it out. And it may mean either redistributing the work or the priorities or bringing in additional help.
Right.
So it's like we said, 100%, there's no more.
Right.
You can overfill your gas tank, but all it does is overflow and it gets
Yep.
wasted on the ground, right? And if you're
Well,
running
well,
on fumes, you're only going to be able to go a couple miles.
well, you bring up a good point, which a lot of us still, struggle with as well, and that is asking for help and assistance,
Mhm.
versus trying to always do it ourselves. I know I'm guilty of that one. You want to, again, you've made that commitment, and you want to fulfill that, that commitment. So but you take it all on yourself,
Mhm.
and that leads to frustration because then you start to try and internally prioritize those things. And then you almost get stuck. You almost do get stagnant because you're thinking,
Yeah.
well, if I contribute to this, I'm going to take away from that. And it just increases that stress level and that your need to feel like you have to get it done.
Mhm.
But again, we fail to reach out and say, hey, I need a little assistance. And part of it is, again, our employers sometimes create that expectation for us that
Mhm.
we have to get it done, we have to do it ourselves, and so a lot of it is on our employers and our leaders that provide us with this guidance,
Mhm.
but they don't again assist us with if we come back and say, hey, I need some help, because then you start to view it as, well, maybe I'm not up to the task, or you may
Right.
feel that they feel that you're not up to the
Right.
task, or I can't count on you. So a lot goes into when you start to evaluate, whether you should take on more tasks or whether you should reach out for help or assistance. All those things start to increase those stress levels, and
Yeah.
and
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 it's like you said, it boils down to, comes back to critical self-reflection. And of that,
right,
within self-reflection is that being honest with yourself. How much can
right,
you
yep,
honestly do? If you're going to be a yes person, you have to understand that there is a cost to that.
yep,
There is a definite cost that you might be able to do it for a few weeks, a few months, maybe even a couple of years, but it's not sustainable to be doing 100% all the time. It's just not sustainable. So you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with yourself about what you're physically capable of, what you're mentally capable of, what your strengths and weaknesses are. You have to be honest with your supervisors and your team and your leadership to understand, what does that really look like? What can you really honestly do? And if you can't keep up, is it time for you to move on? Is it time for that manager to, or your supervisor to reevaluate the workload or the distribution of work? There's a lot of things that start coming into play when you become honest with yourself. And maybe you have health issues, or maybe you have, you know, you're taking care of a family member or a friend or something like that, or there's daycare issues, or parent care. That all these things factor into how much energy you have, how much battery life you have, if you will, to get through that day or through that week or through that year or month. And you have to be honest with yourself, because if you lie to yourself, you're only hurting yourself.
right. I've read several articles just in recent, weeks about this topic we're talking about, just people not being honest with themselves and what it leads to. I mean, you just talked about it could lead to health issues, or you know becoming withdrawn,
It could be a
and
safety issue too. I mean,
absolutely, yeah,
there are
because now
studies
you
out there that equate certain levels of tiredness to certain levels of intoxication. And it's true. I mean, if you're operating a vehicle and you're extremely tired, you need to stop. Whether you're
right,
at work
right,
or doing something for yourself, or whatever, you need to stop. And the
right.
same at work. If you're that tired that you're just barely able to get by at work, you need to stop and rest, because the last thing you want to do is make a critical mistake that's going to have a significant impact on the company or someone's safety.
Right. And you're right. But I think most of us struggle with, really being honest with
Mhm.
ourselves, and saying, hey, raising your hand and saying either I need help or I need to take a break. I've struggled with that for many years just because I thought my responsibility was to get these things accomplished, never really thinking about, and we always talk about work-life balance.
Mhm.
But the reality is our life side of things typically suffers, like you talked about earlier. We
Mhm.
take away from our family and friends and things we should be doing in the house or our household, and in favor of getting things accomplished at the job or other
Mhm.
things we're doing. But I think a huge part of that is the critical self reflection, not only doing that, but actually um, paying attention to it, and really taking that honest look, and be willing to say, hey, I need to take a break.
Yeah.
Hey, I need to slow down. I need to take some things off my plate. And like I said, that evaluation for me, I did that several years ago. And I have not filled the plate back up just
Yeah.
because I know now where I was, and I don't want to put myself in that position
Right.
again. But it really does take that honest look at yourself and that willingness to say, okay, I have to change some things.
Mhm.
Uh,
And
and
even on the
so,
personal development side, I mean, if you're working full time, I don't know, not as raising animals, right? Let's say you have a corporate job, or you
right,
wherever you work, it doesn't matter
right,
where, but you decide to keep acquiring 5 dogs per month, and you have 60 dogs at the end of the year because you love dogs, you love to take care of them. Have you
right,
been honest with yourself that from a personal side, you can adequately take care of your personal life, or those
yep,
60 dogs or 60 cats or whatever, 60 gerbils or hamsters, snakes, scorpions, whatever your animal of choice is? Are you being honest with yourself? Being able to take care of your personal life, or has so much of your personal life taken over where it's impacting your professional life? So again, it works on both sides. You have to
Right.
understand how much time you have for your personal life and how much time you have for your professional life, and make sure that you're operating within your physical, emotional boundaries so that you don't burn out and so you don't wind up, in a bad place. We want people to be healthy and happy and productive and enjoy what they do. And part of that is understanding what's really on your plate. You've got
Right.
two plates, personal plate and professional plate. And if you're like me on Thanksgiving, I load that personal plate way up. But I know about 2 hours later, my professional life is not going to be very productive because
Right.
that carb crash is coming hard. That carb
Yep.
coma is coming.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Dave. We've got a few minutes left in this podcast, or in this episode. Any final thoughts that you want to leave with our audience?
I would say the final thoughts are just pay attention and reevaluate what's on your plate every month or every couple of months,
Yep.
because a grain of sand is just a grain of sand, but with the hourglass, that one little grain of sand turns into a whole pile, and
Continue to
next thing you know,
grow.
one side's full and the other side's empty,
Yep.
and you have to turn it over and start over again. So just keep an eye on and monitor and manage what's on your plate, on your personal life and professional life, because those two things make you who you are, or are they help compile who you are and what you want to be. And if they're not aligning with what you want to do or what you want to be personally or professionally, then you might have to make some difficult choices or maybe some easy choices depending on your situation.
Right. Well, thanks for that, Dave. And I won't go too much further because I think you did a good job of summarizing that. But I do want to echo the fact that periodically taking a look at what's on your plate and
Mhm.
whether it's balanced or not. Like you said, we don't want to put too much on our personal or professional because one or the other is going to suffer
Mhm.
depending on what you have on your plate. And the other part of this, and I don't think we touched on this at all, but the idea that it's okay to say no,
Yeah, it's
that
okay to
that
say no.
that
Or if
you
there's
don't
something that's on your plate that's no longer relevant, take it
absolutely
off, get rid of it.
be okay with taking it
Yeah.
off. And so those are a couple of things that I think we struggle with is again, we want to put on the Superman cape
Yeah.
and try and do everything, but it doesn't make sense sometimes. So just being willing to take that honest look at yourself and making that honest decision or best choice is going to help you, your
Mhm.
family, your work, everything. So with that, again, we want to thank all of our audience for tuning in, listening, viewing this episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. Again, if there's topics you want us to discuss or things you want us to delve deeper into, please let us know. Our information is in the description. And again, if you're getting something out of this, please share with your friends, family, those people that are close to you. Again, me and Dave will continue to do this, but we would just like to know, like you to know that. Again, we're all on our own journeys. Me and Dave still are on our journey. We're excited about where it's going, so we want to help you with being excited about where you're going. And with that, we just want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.